What's really less predictable is the sense that whereas typically public sector is a laggard in adoption, with AI, they are really trying to get out front and be an early adopter of some of this exciting technology.
Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Executive Enablement Series, where we speak with Microsoft Cloud senior leaders and experts about the latest trends in technologies we're seeing in the market. The goal of this series is to share with you and your teams our perspective on the business value driven by the Microsoft Cloud for our mutual customers, and the opportunities for our partners to grow their business with Microsoft.
Hello and welcome. My name is Amy Boyle, and I'm a director in the Global Partner Enablement team here at Microsoft. And today I'm excited to be talking with Dave Sloan. Welcome, Dave. We're so excited to have you with us here today. Can we start by having you just give an introduction of yourself and your role here at Microsoft?
Thanks, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Dave Sloan, and I am pleased to be the Chief Technology Officer for Worldwide Public Sector. I focus on global market development. And what that basically means is that I work with governments day in, day out around the world on their ability to digitally transform using the best products and platforms that exist anywhere on the planet.
Excellent. And as we dig right into the topic, what's top of mind for so many people is AI. So can you tell us a bit about how AI is showing up in the public sector today?
Yeah, I think that it's showing up in two prominent ways. One sort of internal, one external, meaning that we have a tremendous productivity gap to make up in the public sector. So AI is being used to sort of supercharge the public sector productivity of what is an aging and dwindling workforce around the world. And at the same time, it's also being used externally to transform citizen-facing services in ways that really nobody foresaw before this most recent iteration of the AI revolution. I think that those are somewhat predictable. What's really less predictable is the sense that whereas typically public sector is a laggard in adoption, with AI, they are really trying to get out front and be an early adopter of some of this exciting technology.
Oh, that's really interesting to hear. And so if we think about that, and thinking about generative AI like GPT-3 and GPT-4, how is that going to change or disrupt the traditional approaches within the public sector?
Yeah, so if I speculate, down the line, obviously the immediate term effects are going to be similar to what they are in any large enterprise, that people are able to do simple tasks of correspondence and research and analysis and briefing and things like that far more effectively than they were able to do before, and create sort of a more accessible and inclusive form of government than has existed before. If I forecast it down the line, what I really see is a revolution in expectations for how we work with the public sector as citizens, that sort of a chat or natural language interface that may be based on text or maybe based on speech will become the expectation, almost the default interface for any service that any citizen wants to access from any government in the world. And you can imagine the difference that that has, especially in countries that may be dealing with dozens or scores of languages with an extraordinarily broad educational base or economic base, just making government more accessible by default.
So, what considerations should public sector leaders have when harnessing AI capabilities to better serve their customers?
Public sector has a burden that is different from typical commercial clients. They are conservative by nature, sometimes even to a fault, although we understand why, and it's for very valid reasons. They are spending the citizen treasury, tax dollars, instead of any venture capital or anything like that. So we would expect them to measure twice and cut once compared to a game designer that's working out of a garage somewhere or something like that. But as a result, they have sort of a compliance burden as well as an ethical burden that is higher than normal industries or even highly regulated industries. When you're dealing with personal data that it's not the citizens' choice to provide. They have to provide it as citizens of the country. Obviously, the burden to protect that data is much higher. And as a result, when tools like AI come onto the scene and are not instantly explicable in terms of classical IT, there is going to be an additional level of scrutiny from public sector leaders before they use it. To sum it up, there is a trust foundation that needs to be established before public sector can engage with AI. And Microsoft is certainly rising to that occasion and trying to make sure that that trust relationship is established.
How can Azure OpenAI ensure that compliance, security, and that safety for these public sector organizations? And what are the measures in place to align with international compliance standards as well?
Yeah, so this is really one of the good news or even great news stories of the marriage of AI and Azure. Because when a lot of countries come to this in the first place, their instinct is to sort of roll their own, that they want to maintain control over their model. They want it to be, culturally grounded in their own society and their own values. And they look initially to, their own R&D or even open source models in order to meet that. That turns out to be an extraordinarily costly, risky, and time consuming process. And even at the end of that process, what you're left with is maybe a very functional model, but one that exists completely in a vacuum without any of that governance or privacy or safety controls around it. What we're able to deliver really from the get-go with Azure OpenAI service, and indeed all of our AI services that are hosted on Azure, is all the functionality of a highly capable large language model while not compromising any of the enterprise security, governance, or compliance controls that you get by default just by being on Microsoft's cloud. So, Azure holds more than 100 compliance standards that we audit without any cost to our customers on an annual basis. So things like SOC 2 and the ISO standards that are recognized internationally, as well as important national standards like FedRAMP in the United States or ISMAP or IRAP, there are so many acronyms, and you can go onto the Microsoft Trust Center and not just see which compliance standards we have certified to, but the actual certification materials that we use. That is an unprecedented level of transparency when working with IT and a real accelerator in cost savings to our customers. So the ability to access innovation with compliance out of the gate is really a game changer in public sector.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I don't know if you have additional things to share, but just thinking specifically about the citizens and employees' private information when they're using AI for public sector services and missions.
So I think it's important to remember here that even though we're very much experiencing an AI moment, public sector, this is both an AI moment and a cloud moment because there's been a lot of reluctance to move especially sensitive data sets in public sector to the cloud. But now with the return on investment and the critical new functionality that can be brought with AI to that data, there's more impetus to do so. So we're having to tackle both that sort of cloud barrier to entry as well as the AI barrier to entry in some cases simultaneously. So we got to go back to fundamentals, right? We need to understand that our well-architected framework and our shared responsibility model mean that we can go a long way, both in terms of our technical controls, our contractual obligations, our policies and legal commitments in safeguarding privacy and security in the cloud. But it also requires that applications be built to a high standard within the cloud, the portion that we as Microsoft can't and shouldn't take ownership of, but our customers can. So when it's something like SaaS, obviously there's a lot more responsibility on Microsoft's plate. When it's IaaS or PaaS, there's a lot more that's on the customer's plate. But fortunately, we have things like the well-architected framework that create extraordinarily transparent and clear guidelines that our customers can adapt to safeguard that privacy, confidentiality, and security in the cloud. And even things like landing zones and policy as code that make it even more of an acceleration and allow for sort of monitoring and drift detection to make sure that you're not just starting to compute securely in the cloud, but continuing to do so and sustaining that compliance position long into the future.
Dave, it would be interesting to hear from you some of the challenges that we've had in the public sector adopting AI.
So, as we mentioned, AI is in the cloud, right? That these next generation of tools are exclusively offered on hyperscale fabric. And the government has had compliance challenges adopting the cloud around the world. There have been open questions around privacy, security, and compliance that have really slowed public cloud adoption, especially for sensitive workloads. I think we've overcome many of those objections. And certainly Microsoft has moved dramatically in terms of its positioning to meet governments where they are on these critical topics. And really, I think we've set the stage for rapid adoption going forward.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that would be interesting to touch on as well is just the steps that can be taken to address the challenge of data sovereignty as well, while taking advantage of this transition to the cloud and the utilization of advanced AI capabilities.
Different countries mean different things when they talk about data sovereignty, but they all boil down to a certain level of control that has classically been instantiated through physical control of assets. And we're now really transitioning some of those notions of control into a hyperscale model where we're recognizing that countries can have not just the same level of control, but actually significantly greater control, greater insight, greater ability to monitor and sustain the controls on their data in the cloud than they could in any on-prem data center. There's a lot of FUD, a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about this in the market, about what it means to use the hyperscale cloud, about what it means to use the US hyperscaler outside the United States. And, we should admit that Microsoft's messaging on these points has not always been the clearest. It's taken us a while to sort of evolve our stances to where the public sector needed them to be in order to compute, especially with sensitive data in the hyperscale cloud. The great news is that we have made tremendous progress on this, and we've done a lot of field enablement, especially concentrating on our national technology officers and our national security officers in the field, but really all of our public sector teams to equip them with both the messaging as well as the portfolio of tools that they're able to use in order to meet our customers' expectation for data sovereignty in the hyperscale cloud. And I'm really proud to say at this point that that Azure is not just a permitted environment for sensitive government data in the cloud, but really the preferred environments for sovereign workloads.
We've talked about some of these potential risks and challenges associated with adopting AI in this space. So, how can our partners navigate this effectively to ensure transparency, security, and better public service delivery?
Yeah, so I really think it's a multifaceted aspect. I mean, we absolutely need partners in order to realize these dreams in the public sector. Around the world, we have significant public sector skills gaps. And as hard as we are working and as governments are working in order to close those gaps, we should recognize that most of the capacity in order to implement these efforts exists right now in the private sector, not in the public sector. So we need that ecosystem. We need our partners to invest in these skills and bring them to bear for public sector workloads. But at the same time, in addition to mastering the well-architected framework and really bringing landing zones and best practices that accelerate public sector's adoption of these solutions to the marketplace, all of which are critical roles for partners. There's another aspect of this to partners that I think may be more unfamiliar to our ecosystem, which is that partners need to learn our Microsoft trust narrative as well. We need partners enabled to explain to customers that when you do AI with Microsoft, your data is your data, that we are not taking an exploitative or any sort of interfering role with the relationship between even our retrieval augmented and well-grounded generative AI models versus the sensitive data that our customers are bringing to the cloud. And that's, we've always relied on our partners for their technical expertise and their implementation expertise. We haven't always relied upon them to bring these sort of messaging and narrative and trust aspects to the conversation as well. But every government cares about this. Every government cares about our responsible AI narrative. And there's no way that we alone as Microsoft can scale to meet all those needs. So we're going to need our partner ecosystem to sort of stretch some new muscles here and partner with us in order to bring some of these narratives to the public sector market as well.
Could you share a success story or a case study on the benefits of AI in a public sector organization and how our Microsoft partners can use those examples to drive this innovation and improvement?
Wow, there are just so many to choose from. It's really remarkable how in less than a year we've seen so many ideas get to proof of concept and even to production. I would say it's really unprecedented in the public sector, the degree of rapid adoption that we've seen. And some of them are just extraordinarily transformative. Some of them sort of are founded on that initial chatbot type model that we've all become familiar with ChatGPT, but bringing it for a new level of government accessibility. So I would reference the Supreme Court in Mexico, which uploaded hundreds of thousands of judicial opinions and over 100,000 judicial decisions into a generative AI model grounded with Azure OpenAI service and allowed people to ask natural language questions of it from a citizen's perspective. I mean, think of like the dense legal language that Supreme Court opinions are written in, and then being able to just ask a regular question and not just get a list of cases back, by the way, but actually get a synthesized answer made from that dense legal language that any citizen can understand.
Wow.
Once they fielded this online, they received hundreds of thousands of citizen inquiries just in the first few months that the bot was exposed. So really setting a new bar and a new standard for accessibility in government. And on the other side of the world, we see this not only as a chat interface, but really transforming the business of government. So I would reference, for example, the Cool English program that was rolled out in Taiwan, where students can now interact with a bot just to tell a story, a very classical pedagogic frame, right? Where the bot is asking, okay, who are the main characters and, what setting are they in and what's going on? And, asking questions to sort of iteratively build the story with the students in English. But at the same time, behind the scenes, assessing where the student they're interacting with has strengths or needs remediation. So if they are stronger in vocabulary, then the questions will change in order to get them to up their level of vocabulary even further. If it senses weakness in grammar, then those questions will change to try to remediate some of those simple grammatical skills. All the time, feeding this information back to the teacher at the front of the classroom, by no means replacing that teacher, but augmenting them with more individualized and specialized information than they ever would have had access to before, so that they can build a curriculum that is targeted at where those students in the classroom are really at. So, we're just at the very beginning of what will be a wave of transformative services throughout the public sector, but the early returns are really, really exciting and inspiring.
Absolutely. Those are two great examples, and looking forward to how much is ahead of us. The last question I have for you today before we wrap up is just, how does Microsoft plan to continue to support public sector values and national regulations?
We very much meet our government customers where they are. We have to recognize that this is very much an industry play, right? Just flashing new technology tools in front of public sector customers is insufficient. The truth is, it was never really enough, but we really need to work to understand our customers' mission, to speak to them in the language of government, and then make sure that we bring a suite of tools and solutions that is responsive to their missions. Now, absolutely, that needs to come with a compliance stance, with flexibility in terms of how we contract in different countries, how we go to market in those countries, but making sure that we are always recognizing the unique challenges that the public sector faces, the high bar that they are going to be held to, and making sure that Microsoft can meet their missions where they are, as opposed to demanding that they come to where Microsoft is. I think it's something that we have worked into the bones of all of our public sector teams around the world. And it's really our commitment in worldwide public sector that we bring that sort of government facing industry flavor to all of our interactions.
Dave, this has been a great conversation and a lot of information on a very complex topic. So could you just give us the 3 key takeaways you'd like our listeners to take from this conversation?
Yeah, for partners specifically, I would say, of course, investing in skills is key to making progress in the AI market. The second is that this is going to require a broader skill set, not just the technical skills, but the messaging and narrative and the responsible AI principles together with it. Nothing happens in public sector on AI without a strong trust foundation, and we need partners to participate in that too. And then the third, just that the time for AI in the public sector is now. This is not the classical technology where government will be the last market to onboard. Governments are hungry for these capabilities today, and they can only realize them together with leveraging the partner ecosystem.
Great. And thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you on the next episode.
And that wraps up today's episode. Don't forget that this episode is a part of a series featuring some of our most experienced and innovative global executives, packed full of great insights and examples of how to make the most out of working alongside Microsoft. If you haven't already, make sure to check out our other episodes. No matter your industry or area of focus, the Microsoft Global Partner Enablement team is here to enable you and your teams to achieve more. If you want to hear a little more of this episode, we have a podcast which has some more of our discussion and some bonus content. If there's an area of cloud innovation you'd like to hear more about, please send us a note at salesenablement-gsi@microsoft.com so that we can create content that meets your enablement needs. Thank you for listening, thank you for engaging with us, and thank you for being a Microsoft partner. We'll see you on the next episode of the Microsoft Cloud Executive Enablement Series.